The wind howled through the Montana peaks like a wounded animal, driving snow sideways into Clara Whitmore's face. Her fingers, once soft from years of holding nothing heavier than embroidery needles, now clutched at rocky outcroppings, raw and bleeding beneath torn gloves. She had been walking for 3 days straight, avoiding the main trails and any settlement where someone might recognize the former wife of Samuel Whitmore. Former wife. The words tasted bitter as the wind that chapped her lips. Not widow, which would have brought sympathy. Not divorced, which at least implied mutual agreement. Just former, as if her entire existence in that household had been erased by a few well-placed lies and the testimony of a man who'd wanted what wasn't his to take. Clara stumbled, her boot catching on a snow-covered root. She went down hard, knee striking stone through her worn skirts. The pain shot up her leg, but she bit back the cry. Out here, any sound might attract wolves. Or worse, men. She'd learned that the two-legged predators were far more dangerous than anything nature could throw at her. The settlement of Cedar Falls lay just over the ridge, smoke from its chimneys visible against the gray sky. Her stomach clenched with hunger at the thought of hot food, warm beds, people who might help, but she turned away, heading deeper into the wilderness. Cedar Falls was too close to her old life. Someone there might know about the warrant, about the missing money from the Whitmore family safe, about how she'd supposedly seduced Samuel only to rob him blind. Her brother-in-law James had been thorough in his lies, so thorough that even her own family had turned their backs, choosing to believe the word of a respected businessman over their disgraced daughter. As afternoon faded to dusk, Clara's strength began to fail. She'd managed to trap a rabbit 2 days ago, cooking it over a carefully concealed fire, but the meat was long gone. The handful of dried berries she'd found that morning had only sharpened her hunger. Her vision swam, and she had to stop frequently, leaning against trees to catch her breath. It was during one of these rest stops that she spotted movement in the underbrush. Her hand went immediately to the Navy Colt tucked in her coat, Samuel's gun, the one thing she'd actually taken from that house, though not for the reasons they claimed. The weight of it had been a comfort these past weeks, even though she only had 3 bullets left. A rabbit burst from the bushes, bounding through the snow in erratic leaps. Clara's mouth watered. If she could catch it, that would mean meat for days. She followed its trail, moving as quietly as her exhausted body would allow. The rabbit paused near a cluster of sagebrush, nose twitching. Clara eased the gun from her coat. She'd never been a good shot. That had been one of many things Samuel had mocked her for, but desperation steadied her hand. She aimed, finger on the trigger, when something snapped beneath the snow. The trap sprung with vicious efficiency. Metal teeth bit into her ankle, sending her sprawling. The gun flew from her hand, disappearing into a drift. Clara screamed then, all caution forgotten in the face of blinding pain. She clawed at the trap, trying to pry it open, but the mechanism was rusted shut and her fingers were too weak. Blood seeped through her boot, staining the snow crimson. The rabbit, startled by her cry, bounded away into the gathering darkness. Clara laughed, a broken sound that turned into sobs. How fitting that she'd end like this, caught like the animal she'd tried to become. Night fell fast in the mountains. The temperature plummeted, and Clara's wet clothes began to freeze against her skin. She'd managed to drag herself a few feet, but the trap's chain was secured to a deeply buried stake. Her attempts to dig it out with bare hands had only exhausted her further. The stars emerged, brilliant and cold as diamonds. Clara had never paid them much attention in her previous life, but now she found herself studying them with the focus of the dying. At least it was beautiful here. At least she would end under an open sky rather than in some jail cell or at the end of a rope. She didn't remember crawling those last yards, didn't remember how she'd finally worked the trap's release. All she knew was that suddenly she was moving again, dragging her mangled foot through the snow, following what might have been a deer trail or might have been nothing at all. The shelter appeared like a mirage, a low cabin built into the hillside, smoke trickling from its chimney. Clara blinked, certain she was hallucinating. But the scent of wood smoke was real, as was the faint glow of lamplight through a small window. She made it to the door before her strength gave out entirely. Her fist connected with the rough wood once, twice, before she collapsed against it. The world grayed at the edges. She heard boots on floorboards, the scrape of a bar being lifted. The door opened, and Clara found herself looking up at a man silhouetted against the warm light. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting. His face was all angles and shadows, unreadable in the dimness. He didn't speak, didn't exclaim at finding a half-dead woman on his doorstep. He simply stood there, taking in her torn clothes, her bloody boot, the frost forming on her eyelashes. Clara tried to speak, to explain, to maintain some shred of the dignity that had been her armor for so long. But all that emerged was a whisper. "Please." The man, Elias Boone, though she wouldn't learn his name for days, didn't ask questions, didn't demand to know what she was running from or why she was alone in the mountains. He simply shrugged off his heavy coat and draped it over her shoulders. When she tried to pull away, too proud even now to accept charity, he spoke for the first time. His voice was low, roughened by years of solitude. "Then just stay inside me." It wasn't poetry, wasn't a declaration, just a statement of fact, as if her sheltering within his coat was as natural as snow falling or fire burning. Clara stopped fighting. The warmth of the coat, still holding his body heat, was too much to resist. She let him lift her, surprised by how easily he managed it, as if she weighed nothing at all. The last thing she remembered was being carried across the threshold into a world of warmth and light. The scent of coffee and leather and something indefinable that belonged to the man himself. Her eyes closed, and for the first time in weeks, Clara Whitmore stopped running. Outside, the wind continued its lonely howl through the peaks, and snow began to fall in earnest, covering her tracks as if she had never been there at all. Clara woke to the sound of a knife scraping against wood. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The absence of cold was so foreign that it felt wrong. She lay still, eyes closed, taking inventory. Her ankle throbbed with a deep, steady pain, but it was wrapped tight in clean bandages. She was warm, lying on something soft that smelled of pine boughs and wool. Memory returned in fragments. The trap, the blood, the man who'd opened his door to her. She cracked her eyes open, careful not to move. The cabin was small but meticulously kept. Tools hung on pegs along one wall, each in its designated place. A rifle rested above the fireplace, well-oiled and ready. The floor was swept clean. The few pieces of furniture, a table, 2 chairs, a trunk, were handmade, but solid. Everything spoke of a man who lived by routine and discipline. Elias Boone sat at the table, carving what looked like a spoon from a piece of birch. His movements were economical, precise. He'd changed from whatever he'd worn last night into a clean shirt and pants, though both showed the patches and mends of long use. In the lamplight, she could see him better. Weathered face, dark eyes that missed nothing, hands scarred from years of hard work. He knew she was awake. She could tell by the slight shift in his posture, though he didn't look up from his carving. Clara tried to sit up, biting back a gasp as her ankle protested. Immediately, he set down the knife and moved to the stove, pouring something from a pot into a tin cup. He brought it to her without a word, setting it on a crate beside the narrow bed. The smell of broth made her stomach clench with hunger. She reached for it, then hesitated, pride warring with the need. "I can't pay you," she said, her voice hoarse from disuse. He returned to his chair, picked up the knife again. "Didn't ask you to." She drank the broth slowly, savoring the warmth. It was simple: venison, wild onions, salt. But it tasted better than any feast from her old life. When she finished, she set the cup aside and really looked at her ankle for the first time. He'd done a professional job with the bandaging, better than many doctors she'd known. "You've done this before," she observed. A slight nod. He held up the spoon, examining its bowl critically, then resumed carving. Clara studied him. trying to read something in his face. Most men she'd known would have peppered her with questions by now, would have demanded explanations or tried to impress her with tales of their own adventures. Elias Boone did neither. He simply existed in the space, solid and quiet as the mountains themselves. "The storm set in," he said eventually, not looking up. "Won't be able to travel for days, even if that ankle was sound." Clara's hand moved instinctively to where her coat should be, seeking the gun. The coat hung on a peg by the door, but the weight was wrong. Empty. "Lost in the snow," he said, following her movement. "Went back to look this morning. Too much fresh fall." She should have been terrified. She was trapped in a cabin with a stranger, injured, unarmed, but something about his matter-of-fact delivery, the way he went back to his carving without pressing the advantage, eased her fear. A man with evil intentions wouldn't be so patient. "I should leave," she said anyway. "Testing. In this weather, with that ankle." He shook his head slightly. "You'd be dead in an hour." It wasn't a threat, just a statement of fact. Clara knew he was right. Through the small window, she could see nothing but swirling white. The wind rattled the shutters, reminding her of what waited outside. "I won't be any trouble," she said stiffly, for the first time since she'd woken. He looked directly at her. His eyes were the dark brown of river stones, holding depths she couldn't read. "Didn't think you would be." The day passed in strange, quiet rhythms. Elias went about his business, tending the fire, checking a pot of beans soaking for tomorrow, mending a tear in a shirt. He moved around her presence like water around a stone, neither avoiding nor acknowledging beyond what was necessary. When the broth pot ran low, he refilled it. When she struggled to reach the chamber pot he'd placed discreetly behind a curtain, he offered his arm without comment, then returned to his work. Clara found herself watching him, fascinated despite herself. She'd grown up surrounded by men who filled every silence with their own voices, who couldn't pass a mirror without preening. Elias seemed to have no vanity at all, no need to prove anything to anyone, least of all her. As darkness fell, he prepared a simple meal, beans, dried meat, a hard biscuit that he softened in the broth for her. They ate in silence, the only sounds the pop of the fire and the wind outside. Clara noticed how he ate, steadily, without hurry or greed, like a man who'd learned to appreciate what he had. After dinner, he pulled a blanket from the trunk, shook it out, and laid it on the floor near the fire. Clara understood. He was giving her the bed, such as it was. "I can't take your bed," she protested. He was already settling onto the blanket, pulling off his boots. "You're injured." "But—" "Miss," he didn't raise his voice, but something in his tone stopped her. "You need rest to heal. Can't heal on the floor." It was the longest speech he'd made all day. Clara subsided, uncertain why she was fighting anyway. Pride, probably. It had always been her weakness. Later, lying in the narrow bed that still held the faint warmth of his body, she listened to his breathing deepen into sleep. The fire burned low, casting shifting shadows on the walls. Through a gap in the shutters, she could see snow still falling, erasing the world beyond these four walls. She should have been planning her next move, figuring out where to go when the storm passed. But the warmth and the steady sound of another human's breathing were narcotic after weeks of running. Her eyes grew heavy. Somewhere in the gray hour before dawn, she woke to the sound of distress. Elias was stirring on his makeshift bed, caught in some dream. His breathing was harsh, and she caught fragments of words, a name, perhaps, or a plea. Without thinking, Clara slipped from the bed, careful of her ankle, and lowered herself beside him. In the dim light, she could see sweat on his brow, his hands clenched into fists. Whatever haunted his sleep, it had its claws in deep. She hesitated, then placed her hand lightly on his shoulder. He woke instantly, going from sleep to full alertness in a heartbeat. For a moment, they stayed frozen, her hand on his shoulder, his eyes wide and dark in the dimness. Then he pulled away, sitting up, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Sorry," he muttered, though she wasn't sure if he was apologizing for the dream or for waking her. "We all have ghosts," Clara said quietly. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and she saw something crack in his careful composure. Just for an instant, she glimpsed the pain he carried, as raw and deep as her own. Then the wall went back up, and he was rising, moving to tend the fire. "Sun'll be up soon," he said, his back to her. "Should try to get more sleep." Clara returned to the bed, but sleep didn't come again. She lay watching the growing light through the window, thinking about the man who'd opened his coat to her without question, who asked nothing in return, the man who carved spoons with a surgeon's precision and fought demons in his sleep. Outside, the storm was beginning to break. But in the cabin, another kind of weather was building, slower, quieter, but no less dangerous for all that. The morning after the storm broke, Clara tested her ankle and found she could bear weight if she was careful. She limped to the window, studying the transformed landscape, pristine white slopes broken only by the dark thrust of pines, beautiful and deadly as everything in this territory. "I can help," she announced, turning to find Elias pulling on his coat. He paused, one arm in a sleeve. "You're injured." "Not helpless." The words came out sharper than intended, but she was tired of being cargo. "I've spent too many years being decorative. Surely there's something I can do." He finished putting on the coat, considering. Then he gestured to the woodpile near the stove. Kindling needs splitting, small pieces. It wasn't charity. She could see that in the way he showed her how to use the hatchet, positioning her on a stump where she could work without standing. The movements were awkward at first, her soft hands clumsy with the unfamiliar tool. But there was satisfaction in watching the wood split along the grain, in creating something useful from her efforts. Elias went about his morning tasks, checking trap lines he'd set before the storm, gathering fresh snow for water. He moved through the white landscape with an economy that spoke of years of practice, never hurrying but covering ground with steady purpose. By the time he returned, Clara had produced a respectable pile of kindling and raised blisters on both palms. She was absurdly proud of both. He examined her hands without comment, then retrieved a tin of salve from a shelf. "Here." The salve smelled of pine resin and something else, herbs she couldn't identify. It soothed the burning immediately. As she worked it into her palms, Elias began cleaning the rabbit he'd brought back, movements quick and efficient. "Where did you learn to doctor wounds?" she asked, needing to fill the silence with something besides her own thoughts. "Army," he said shortly, not looking up from his work. "War teaches you what's necessary." Which war? Though she could guess. He had the right age for it, the one that split the country in half. His knife paused for just a moment, though it did its splitting long before the first shot was fired. Clara watched him work, noting the precise way he separated pelt from meat, wasting nothing, north or south. Does it matter now? She supposed it didn't. The war had ended nearly 20 years ago, but its ghosts lingered everywhere, in every family that had lost sons, every town that had burned. "My husband fought for the Union," she offered. "Came back different," he said, though I sometimes wondered if war just revealed what was already there. Elias glanced at her, something flickering in his dark eyes. Some men use war as an excuse for what they become after. It was more insight than he'd offered in 3 days. Clara found herself hungry for more, for understanding of this man who'd taken her in without question. But he'd returned to his work. The moment of openness passed. That evening, as they ate the rabbit stew he'd prepared, Clara finally broke the careful silence they'd maintained about her circumstances. "I didn't steal from them," she said abruptly. "I know how it looks. Woman marries up. Husband's family has money. Funds go missing. Woman flees in the night. But I didn't take their money." Elias continued eating, unhurried. When he spoke, it wasn't what she expected. Man who sets a trap doesn't much care what the animal was running from. Meaning you're here now. Rest is just weather that's already passed. But Clara couldn't let it go. The injustice burned in her chest, demanded witness. "It was James, my brother-in-law. He..." He'd been making advances since I married Samuel. When I refused him, threatened to tell... She stopped, swallowing hard. He was clever about it, made it look like I'd been planning it all along. Even had receipts forged in my hand. Your husband didn't defend you? A bitter laugh escaped her. Samuel believed what was easier to believe, that his brother was honorable and his wife was a scheming harlot who'd trapped him into marriage for his money. Elias set down his spoon, giving her his full attention for the first time since she'd started speaking. Where's your husband now? Dead. The word fell between them like a stone. Heart gave out 2 months after I left, or was made to leave. Rather, James blamed me for that too. Said the shame killed him. Convenient. The single word held more understanding than all the speeches she'd endured from judges and lawmen. Clara felt something ease in her chest. A knot she hadn't realized was there. They put a bounty on me, she continued. Theft, they said, though they added murder when Samuel died. $500 for my return to Cedar Falls to stand trial. Trial. Elias's mouth twisted slightly. Man like this James, he'd make sure you never made it to a courthouse. You believe me? It wasn't a question. She could see it in his face. Known men like your brother-in-law. Known them all my life. He rose, carrying their empty bowls to the wash basin. Man who forces his wants on others doesn't stop at one crime. Clara watched him wash the dishes with the same careful attention he gave everything. When he was done, he surprised her by pulling something from beneath his bed. A rifle, which he began to clean with practiced movements. You know how to use a long gun? He asked. No. Samuel said ladies had no business with firearms. Samuel was a fool. He said it matter-of-factly, without heat. Out here, knowing how to defend yourself isn't about being a lady or not. It's about surviving another day. He showed her how to hold the rifle, how to sight down the barrel. Her first attempts were clumsy. The weapon was heavier than she'd expected, and her arms shook with the effort of holding it steady. But Elias was patient, correcting her stance with brief touches, explaining the mechanics in his spare way. Why are you helping me? She asked finally, lowering the unloaded rifle. He took the weapon back, checking it over before setting it aside. Man ought to know how to set a bone. Woman ought to know how to shoot straight. World simpler when people know what they need to know. But that wasn't really an answer, and they both knew it. Clara waited, watching him bank the fire for the night. When he finally spoke again, his voice was quiet. Had a brother once, younger. Got himself tangled up with the wrong woman, or that's what everyone said. She was married. See, husband was, well, he was what he was. When she finally ran, my brother helped her. Husband came after them both. He stopped there, but Clara could fill in the rest. Your brother didn't make it. Neither did she. Elias stared into the dying flames. Found them 3 days later. Sheriff ruled it justified. Man defending his property. He said nobody questioned why they were shot in the back. I'm sorry. He shrugged, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. Long time ago, but when I found you at my door. He trailed off, then seemed to shake himself. Get some rest. Your ankle needs it. Clara made her slow way to the bed, understanding now why he'd taken her in, why he asked no questions. She was someone's sister, someone's daughter, someone who'd run from a man who thought he owned her. To Elias Boone, that was enough. That night, when the nightmares came for him again, she didn't hesitate. She rose and went to him, placing her hand on his shoulder as before. This time, when he woke, he didn't pull away. They sat in the darkness, not speaking, while the fire crumbled to embers and the wind sang through the pines outside. The mountain lion had been stalking them for 2 days. Elias noticed the tracks first, large pads with 4 toes, no claw marks, circling the cabin at night. He didn't tell Clara immediately, not wanting to add fear to her burden, but he started keeping the rifle loaded by the door and checking the bolt more frequently. Clara had grown stronger over the past week. Her ankle, while still tender, could bear her full weight. She'd taken over the cooking, discovering a talent for making the simple ingredients stretch into satisfying meals. Her hands had hardened from splitting wood and hauling water, and she no longer flinched from the necessary work of survival. It was late afternoon when the attack came. Clara was outside gathering kindling, having insisted she could manage the short trip to the woodpile alone. Elias was repairing a harness in the cabin when he heard her scream, not the startled cry of someone who'd turned an ankle, but the primal sound of mortal terror. He grabbed the rifle and burst through the door to find Clara backed against the woodpile. A massive cat crouched 20 feet away. The animal was thin, ribs showing through its tawny coat, a desperate creature driven by hunger to daylight hunting. "Don't run," Elias said quietly, moving slowly to put himself between Clara and the cat. "Back toward the cabin. Slow." The mountain lion's yellow eyes tracked their movement, muscles bunching beneath its hide. Elias could see the calculation in its gaze. 2 prey, 1 wounded, odds improving. "Elias," Clara's voice was steady despite her fear. "The rifle?" "Can't risk a shot. Might just wound it." He kept his eyes on the cat, aware of every breath, every heartbeat. "When I tell you, get inside. Bar the door. I won't leave you." "Clara." He put command in his voice. "Now." The cat sprang. Elias shoved Clara toward the cabin and met the animal's charge. Using the rifle as a club, they went down in a tangle of limbs and fury. The cat's claws raking his shoulder, its weight driving him into the snow. The rifle went flying. He got his hands around the animal's throat, trying to keep those terrible jaws from his face. The cat was weak from starvation, but still stronger than any man. Its back legs raked at his stomach, shredding his coat. He could smell its breath, rank with hunger and disease. Then Clara was there, the hatchet from the woodpile in her hands. She brought it down on the cat's spine with desperate strength. The animal yowled, twisting to face this new threat, and Elias used the distraction to roll free. He found his knife and lunged back in, finding the spot between ribs that led to the heart. The mountain lion died hard, fighting until the last of its strength bled out into the snow. When it finally stilled, Elias collapsed beside it, breathing hard, blood spreading from a dozen wounds. "Elias!" Clara dropped to her knees beside him, hands already moving to assess the damage. "Oh God, your shoulder." "Had worse," he managed, though the pain was already making his vision gray at the edges. "Help me inside." She got him to the cabin through sheer will, supporting his weight despite her barely healed ankle. Once inside, she became someone he hadn't seen before, efficient, decisive, cutting away his ruined shirt to expose the wounds. The worst was the shoulder. 4 parallel gouges that went deep into muscle. His stomach was better protected by the heavy coat, though still bloody. Various other scratches covered his arms and chest, testament to the cat's desperation. "This needs stitching," Clara said, examining the shoulder wounds. "Do you have trunk, leather pouch?" She found his field medical kit, left over from the war. Her hands were steady as she threaded the needle, though he could see the fear in her eyes. "I've never done this before." "Like mending cloth," he said through gritted teeth. "Just tougher fabric." She poured whiskey over the wounds. He nearly passed out from that alone, then set to work. Her stitches were careful, neat despite her inexperience. She'd seen enough needlework in her previous life to understand the mechanics, even if the application was different. Elias focused on her face to distract from the pain, the concentration in her expression, the way she bit her lower lip, the strand of hair that had escaped her braid to fall across her cheek. When had she become beautiful to him? Not pretty in the conventional way of her former life, but something better, strong, capable, real. "There," she said finally, tying off the last stitch. "That should hold." She cleaned the other wounds, applied the pine salve, wrapped his ribs where the claws had scored them. Through it all, she kept up a steady stream of talk about her childhood, her sisters, anything to keep him conscious and distracted. "You should have run," he said when she finished, his voice rough. Should have barred the door like I told you. She was washing blood from her hands, her back to him. Would you have? If it had been me. He didn't answer. They both knew he wouldn't have. Clara turned to face him, and he saw tears on her cheeks, the first he'd seen from her since that night she'd collapsed at his door. You could have died. That thing could have killed you. But it didn't. He wanted to reach for her, but his shoulders screamed at the attempt. You did good. Real good. She laughed, a shaky sound. I hit a mountain lion with a hatchet. My mother would faint. Your mother never had to survive. You do. He caught her gaze, held it. You're not who you were. Clara, that woman, the one they tried to break, she's gone. You're stronger now. She moved closer, sitting on the edge of the bed. I was so frightened. When I saw it leap at you, her voice broke. Without thinking, he lifted his less injured arm, touched her face. She leaned into his palm, closing her eyes. They stayed like that for a long moment, the cabin silent except for the pop of the fire and their breathing. Clara, he started, not sure what he meant to say. She opened her eyes, and what he saw there stopped his words. Slowly, giving him time to pull away, she leaned down. Their lips met, gentle at first, then deeper as something long contained broke free. She tasted of tears and strength, of survival against all odds. When they parted, she was trembling. I should let you rest, she whispered. Stay. The word came out rough, urgent. Just stay close. She stretched out beside him on the narrow bed, careful of his injuries. He wrapped his good arm around her, pulling her against his uninjured side. She fit there perfectly, as if the space had always been waiting for her. We'll need to deal with the cat come morning, she said after a while. Can't leave it out there. Pelt's worth something, even winter thin, might make boots. Ever practical. But there was fondness in her voice. They lay in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn down. Outside, night was falling. But for once the darkness held no threat. The monster had been faced and defeated. They had survived, together. Elias? Clara's voice was soft, almost sleep-blurred. If you hadn't opened your door that night, but I did. He tightened his arm around her. That's what matters. I did. She turned in his embrace, mindful of his wounds, and kissed him again. This time it was she who whispered against his lips, Then let me stay inside you. The words were an echo of that first night, but transformed. Not a refuge from the storm now, but a choice, a claiming. He answered by pulling her closer still, until there was no space between them at all, just shared warmth and the promise of something neither had dared hope for. The dead mountain lion could wait for morning. Tonight, they had earned this closeness, this peace, this unexpected gift of finding each other at the edge of the world. The bounty hunters arrived on a crystalline morning 3 weeks after the mountain lion attack. Clara saw them first, 4 riders picking their way up the valley trail, dark shapes against the snow. Her blood turned to ice. Even at this distance, she recognized the purposeful way they moved, the rifles prominent in their saddle scabbards. Elias, she breathed, backing away from the window. He was at her side instantly, peering through the gap in the shutters. His shoulder had healed well under her care, leaving only raised scars as testament to the cat's fury. One look at the riders and his expression hardened. Get the rifle, he said quietly. The Colt, too. It's in the trunk, wrapped in oilcloth. There are 4 of them. Clara's voice stayed steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. We should run. Where? He was already checking his own weapons. Movements economical. They've got horses. We don't, and they know we're here. Smoke's been rising from this chimney all morning. The riders were closer now. Clara could make out details. Heavy coats, worn saddles. The careful way they studied the cabin. Professional manhunters. Then, not local law. Maybe they're just passing through, she said without conviction. Elias gave her a look that said he knew better. Men like that don't come to places like this by accident. Someone in Cedar Falls talked, or maybe they saw your tracks from weeks back, followed them here. The lead rider raised a hand, halting the group just outside rifle range. Smart. He cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Hello, the cabin. We're looking for a woman might have passed this way. Red-headed, about 25 years, goes by Clara Whitmore." Clara's hand found Elias's arm, gripped tight. He covered her fingers with his own, just for a moment. "What woman?" Elias called back. "Haven't seen anyone all winter." "That so?" The leader's voice carried amusement. "Smoke says otherwise. Friend. Awful lot of wood being burned for one man alone. I like keeping warm." "Sure you do." The rider shifted in his saddle. "Tell you what, we're reasonable men. Just let us have a look inside. Confirm she's not there, and we'll be on our way." "Don't think so?" The temperature seemed to drop 10 degrees. The leader's companion leaned in, said something low. Clara caught the gesture he made. Someone circling around back. "They're going to surround us," she whispered. Elias nodded slightly. He'd seen it too. "Listen," he said, pitching his voice to Carrie. "You boys seem like practical men. No point in anybody getting shot over a misunderstanding." "Then step out. Show us you're alone." "Can't do that either." A pause. Then, $500 is a lot of money. "Friend, but it's not worth dying for. Just send her out, and we'll forget you were ever involved." Clara started forward, but Elias caught her arm. "No, I won't let you die for me." "You're not letting me do anything." His dark eyes were fierce. "I'm choosing—" "Why?" The question tore from her throat. "Why would you—" "You know why." She did. It was there in every look, every touch since the night with the mountain lion. Neither had put words to it, but it lived between them now, warm and real as the fire in the hearth. "This is your last warning." The leader's patience was fraying. "Send out the woman, or we're coming in." Elias turned from the window, gripped Clara's shoulders. "You remember what I taught you about shooting?" "Yes, but—" "They'll try the back door. Maybe send one to the window. I'll handle the front." He pressed the Colt into her hands. "Anyone comes through, that's not me. You shoot. Don't hesitate. Don't warn. Just shoot." "Elias," he kissed her, hard and quick. "We're going to survive this. Both of us." The first shot shattered the window, showering them with glass. They dove in opposite directions. Elias to the front wall. Clara toward the back of the cabin. More shots followed, splintering wood, keeping them pinned. The back door exploded inward. A man filled the doorway, rifle raised. Clara didn't think, just raised the Colt and fired. The recoil knocked her back, but her aim was true. The man clutched his shoulder, spinning away. "Earl's hit!" someone shouted. Elias's rifle boomed. Through the chaos, Clara heard a cry of pain, the sound of a body hitting snow. 2 down. But more shots came from different angles. They were surrounded now. "Give it up!" the leader again. Closer now. "You winged Earl, but he'll live. Can't say the same for you if this continues." I've got plenty of ammunition," Elias called back. "And nowhere pressing to be." A bottle sailed through the broken window, trailing flame. Elias kicked it back out before it could catch, but they all knew what it meant. The hunters could burn them out if they chose. "Stop!" Clara couldn't watch Elias die for her pride. She stood, ignoring his sharp gesture to get down. "I'll come out. Just don't hurt him." "Clara, no." "Smart woman," the leader called. "Come on out. Hands where we can see them." She moved toward the door, but Elias caught her, spun her back against the wall. "You go out there. You're dead. Maybe not today, but soon. Men like your brother-in-law don't leave witnesses. And if I stay, you're dead now. Then we die together." His hand cupped her face, thumb brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "But I'm betting on us living. You survived winter storms and mountain lions. These are just men." The truth of it steadied her. They were just men. Dangerous, yes, but not forces of nature, not inevitable. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. Something shifted in his expression. Pride, maybe, or recognition. "Watch the window. I'm going out the front. What? Elias, no. Trust me. He was out the door before she could stop him, moving with the fluid grace she'd seen when he hunted. Shouts erupted. Clara rushed to the window in time to see him dive behind the woodpile as bullets chewed splinters from the logs. She saw movement to the left. One of the hunters trying to flank Elias's position. Without thinking, she fired through the window. Missed, but close enough to drive the man back to cover. The battle became a blur of gun smoke and noise. Elias moved like a ghost, using the terrain he knew so well, while Clara covered him from the cabin. The Colt clicked empty. She found Elias's ammunition, reloaded with shaking hands. Then, sudden silence. "Elias," she called, fear sharp in her throat. "Here." He emerged from behind the shelter they'd built for firewood, rifle in hand. It's done. 3 of the hunters were down, including the leader. The 4th, Earl, clutching his wounded shoulder, was already mounting his horse, fleeing back down the trail. Clara stumbled out into the snow, the Colt hanging loose in her hand. The bodies looked smaller somehow. Just men after all. Elias pulled her against him, and she felt him trembling. Not with fear, she realized, but with the aftermath of violence. "Will there be more?" she asked against his chest. "Maybe, probably." He pulled back to look at her. "I'm sorry. You came here running from violence, and I brought it to your door." "No." She gripped his shirt, fierce, suddenly. They brought it, just like James brought it, just like every man who thinks he can own what won't be owned. She took a breath, steadying herself. "I'm tired of running. Elias, I'm tired of being afraid." He studied her face, seeing the change there. The last of the frightened society woman was gone, burned away in gunfire. What remained was steel and flame, beautiful in its strength. "Then we stand," he said simply. Together. That night, after they dealt with the grim necessity of the bodies, they held each other in the dark. Not gentle now, but desperate, affirming life in the most primal way. When they came together, it was with the fierce joy of survivors, of warriors who'd faced death and chosen each other instead. Later, skin cooling in the night air, Clara traced the scars on his shoulder. "We could leave," she said quietly. "Go somewhere they'd never find us." "Could," he agreed. "Or we could go to Cedar Falls. Face this properly. Earl will talk. Spread the word that you've got protection now. Might make your brother-in-law think twice. And if it doesn't, then we handle what comes. Like we handled today." Clara was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I choose to stand." He kissed her temple, pulled her closer. Outside, wind sang through the peaks, but the cabin was warm, secure. They'd painted its walls with violence today, but also with something else, a declaration that some things were worth fighting for. "Sleep," Elias murmured. "Tomorrow we start preparing for the journey." Clara closed her eyes, feeling safer than she had since that night she'd fled her old life. The girl who'd been too proud to ask for shelter was gone. In her place was a woman who'd found something worth standing ground for, and a man who'd stand beside her. The old trader arrived on a gray morning when spring was just beginning to whisper through the mountains. Clara was practicing with the rifle. She could now hit a target at 50 yards consistently, when she spotted the mule-drawn wagon laboring up the trail. "Elias," she called, not taking her eyes off the approaching vehicle. He emerged from the cabin, automatically checking the pistol at his hip. They'd both developed the habit of constant vigilance since the bounty hunters. But as the wagon drew closer, Elias relaxed. "It's Josiah," he said. "Trade supplies through these parts every few months." The wagon rolled to a stop, and an elderly man with skin like weathered leather climbed down. His eyes went immediately to Clara, surprise flickering across his features. "Well now," Josiah said, removing his hat. "Didn't expect to find company up here. Elias, ma'am." "Josiah," Elias nodded. "This is Clara. Clara, Josiah Hendricks. Known him since I first came to these mountains." The old trader's eyes sharpened with recognition. "Clara, Would that be Clara Whitmore, by chance? Ice formed in her stomach. Her hand moved toward the rifle, but Josiah raised both hands peacefully. Easy now. I'm not here for bounties. Too old for that foolishness. He studied her with intelligent eyes. Though I did hear some interesting stories in Cedar Falls. About bounty hunters who went into the mountains and never came back. About a woman wrongly accused, and a brother-in-law who's getting mighty nervous. What else did you hear? Elias asked. His tone neutral. Josiah spat tobacco juice into the snow. Heard James Whitmore's been drinking heavy, talking wild when he's in his cups, saying things that don't match up with his story from before. He looked at Clara. Your friend Rebecca's been asking questions too, stirring up doubt. Rebecca? Clara's heart leapt. Her closest friend from her married life. She'd assumed Rebecca had believed the lies like everyone else. Pretty determined lady, been gathering statements from servants, tracking down receipts. Seems those documents that proved you a thief? The ink was awful fresh for papers supposedly months old. Clara sank onto the cabin step, overwhelmed. After months of running, of believing herself friendless, to hear that someone had been fighting for her. There's more, Josiah continued, unpacking supplies as he talked. Sheriff's getting pressure to look into things proper, especially after Earl came back shot up, babbling about self-defense and a man who fought like the devil himself. He glanced at Elias with something like approval. Course, James is pushing for a posse, but folks are asking questions. Why so eager to see her dead if she's just a thief? Because dead women can't testify, Elias said grimly. Exactly. Josiah handed over a bundle of letters. Your friend asked me to bring these if I found you. Said you'd know what to do with them. Clara's hands shook as she opened the first letter. Rebecca's familiar handwriting blurred through tears as she read accounts from servants who'd witnessed James's unwanted advances, records showing the forged documents, even a statement from the bank clerk who'd been pressured to alter dates. This could clear my name, she whispered. Could do more than that, Josiah observed. Could see James Whitmore in prison where he belongs, if you're willing to go back and fight. Clara looked at Elias, found him watching her with that steady gaze she'd come to trust absolutely. We were already planning on it, she said. Josiah nodded slowly. Figured as much. You've got the look of fighters, both of you. He pulled out more supplies. Ammunition, salt, fabric. I'll tell you plain, though, James has friends, powerful ones. This won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is, Clara replied, surprising herself with the steel in her voice. They spent the day preparing, Josiah sharing news from the outside world while Clara and Elias packed what they'd need for the journey. The old trader watched them work together, noted the casual intimacy of two people who'd learned to move as one. How long to Cedar Falls? Clara asked as they loaded provisions. 4 days if the weather holds. Josiah replied, I'd ride with you, but this old body can't take hard travel anymore. We'll manage, Elias said. Appreciate the offer, though. That evening, as Josiah prepared to continue on his route, he pulled Clara aside. That man of yours, I've known him 3 years. Never seen him let anyone past his guard. You must be something special. He's the special one, Clara said softly. He gave me shelter when I had nothing to offer in return. Josiah chuckled. Oh, you offered something all right. Just took you both a while to see it. He climbed onto his wagon seat with a grunt. You watch each other's backs down there. Town justice can be trickier than mountain justice. After he left, Clara found herself restless, pacing the small cabin. The prospect of returning to Cedar Falls, of facing the people who'd condemned her without trial, sat like lead in her stomach. Second thoughts? Elias asked, looking up from cleaning his rifle. No. She stopped pacing, met his eyes. Just afraid. Not of James. Not anymore, but of becoming her again. That woman who smiled and simpered and pretended everything was fine while her world crumbled. Elias set aside the rifle, rose to take her hands. You won't. How can you be sure? Because I've seen you kill a mountain lion with a hatchet, seen you stand your ground against armed men, seen you survive everything these mountains could throw at you. His thumb traced circles on her palm. That other woman, she was just a mask you wore. This is who you really are. Clara studied their joined hands, his scarred and capable, hers no longer soft but strong from months of hard work. I love you, she said quietly. The first time either had spoken it aloud. I should have said it before, but he silenced her with a kiss, deep and sure. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers. I've loved you since you told me you were too proud to ask for shelter, he said. Loved your strength, your fire, even when you didn't see it yourself. They made love that night with a tenderness born of confession, taking their time, memorizing each sensation. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a hard journey, but tonight was theirs alone. Later, as Clara lay in his arms watching firelight play across the ceiling, she thought about the woman who'd stumbled to this door months ago. That woman had been running from everything. Her past, her pain, herself. Tomorrow, she would ride toward all of it, but she wouldn't be alone. What are you thinking? Elias murmured against her hair. That I'm not too proud to ask for shelter anymore, she said. But I don't need it, not the way I did before. No? She turned in his arms, traced the scar on his shoulder, her mark on him, as much as any wedding band. No, because now I know the difference between shelter and home. Shelter is what you seek in a storm. Home is what you defend. Understanding lit his dark eyes. And we'll defend it. Together. Together, she agreed, sealing it with a kiss. Outside, spring wind rattled the shutters, carrying the scent of melting snow and new beginnings. In a few days, they would face Clara's past, would fight for justice and the chance to build a future. But that was tomorrow's battle. Tonight, in their mountain cabin, they were simply two people who'd found each other at the edge of the world and chosen to stand together against whatever came next. It was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Cedar Falls hadn't changed much in the months Clara had been gone. The same storefronts lined Main Street. The same church steeple pierced the sky. But as she and Elias rode in, Clara felt the weight of watching eyes, heard the whispers that followed in their wake. That's her, someone muttered. The Whitmore woman. Heard she killed those bounty hunters. Got herself a gunman now. Clara kept her head high, fighting the urge to shrink into herself. Beside her, Elias rode easy in the saddle, but she could see his alertness in the way his hand never strayed far from his weapon. They went first to Rebecca's house, a modest two-story on the respectable side of town. When the door opened, Rebecca gasped, then pulled Clara into a fierce embrace. I knew you'd come back, she whispered fiercely. I knew you wouldn't let him win. Inside, over tea that Clara couldn't taste past her nervousness, Rebecca laid out everything she'd discovered. The evidence was damning. Forged documents, bribed officials, a pattern of lies that was finally beginning to unravel. The sheriff wants to speak with you, Rebecca said. He's not entirely convinced, but he's listening now, especially after James made some threats against me when he was drunk last week. He threatened you? Clara's hand clenched around her teacup. Nothing I couldn't handle, but it showed his true nature to several witnesses. Rebecca glanced at Elias, who'd remained silent throughout. Your man has quite a reputation. People are saying he took down 4 bounty hunters single-handed. It wasn't single-handed, Clara said quietly. We protected each other. The sheriff's office was their next stop. Sheriff Watson was a careful man, gray-haired and methodical. He listened to Clara's story without interruption, examined the evidence Rebecca had gathered, asked pointed questions about the bounty hunters. Self-defense, you say? He studied Elias with law-worn eyes. They came shooting. Elias replied simply, We shot back better. Watson leaned back in his chair. I'll need to investigate further, but this evidence, it's compelling. Problem is, James Whitmore's got influence. His word carries weight in this town. Then let's make him speak his words publicly. Clara said, Call a town meeting. Let him make his accusations to my face, and I'll answer them. Let the people judge. Watson's eyebrows rose. That's a dangerous game. Mrs. Whitmore, crowds can turn ugly. I'm not Mrs. Whitmore anymore, Clara said firmly. And I'm tired of being judged in absentia. If my neighbors want to condemn me, let them do it while looking me in the eye. The sheriff agreed. Reluctantly. Word spread quickly. There would be a public hearing at the town hall the next evening. James would have his chance to present his case, and Clara hers. That night, in the small hotel room they'd taken, Clara paced while Elias cleaned his weapons. What if they don't believe me? What if the evidence isn't enough? Then we leave, Elias said calmly. Head west. Start fresh somewhere else. Just like that. He looked up at her. I told you before, I chose to stand with you. That doesn't change based on what some townspeople think. The next evening, the town hall was packed. It seemed every soul in Cedar Falls had come to witness the confrontation. Clara entered with Elias at her side, Rebecca flanking her other side. A murmur ran through the crowd, some hostile, some merely curious. James Whitmore stood at the front, well-dressed as always, but showing signs of strain. His face flushed when he saw Clara, ugly emotion twisting his features. There she is, he shouted. The thief who robbed my family, who drove my brother to his grave. I stole nothing, Clara said, her voice carrying clearly through the hall, except perhaps your pride when I refused your advances. Gasps rippled through the crowd. James's face went purple. Lies. She's always been a manipulator, seducing my poor brother. Then let's examine the evidence. Sheriff Watson interrupted. He began presenting what Rebecca had found, the forged documents, the testimonies from servants, the bank records, with each piece of evidence. James grew more agitated. He began to contradict himself, his story changing as he tried to explain away each proof of his deception. The crowd's mood shifted, doubt creeping in where certainty had been. She's bewitched you all, James finally exploded. Just like she bewitched Samuel, and now she's got this killer to protect her. He pointed at Elias. Ask him how many men he's murdered. Elias stepped forward, and the crowd instinctively stepped back. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, but carried to every corner of the room. I've killed men, yes, in war, in self-defense, to protect what matters. He looked at Clara. I'd do it again. You see? James was nearly screaming now. She consorts with murderers. The only murderer here, Clara said, steel in her voice, is the man who drove his own brother to his death with shame and lies. The man who sent hunters after me like I was an animal. The man who stands here now, trying to destroy me because I wouldn't submit to his desires. Prove it, James snarled. You have no proof of these wild accusations. But I do. A new voice from the back of the hall. Everyone turned as a young woman made her way forward, Jane Morrison, who'd been a maid in the Whitmore household. I kept quiet before because I was scared, Jane said, voice shaking but determined. But I can't anymore. I saw Mr. James Corner Mrs. Clara multiple times, saw him threaten her when she refused him, and I saw him in Mr. Samuel's study the night those papers appeared, the ones that proved she was stealing. The girl lies! James lunged toward Jane, but Elias stepped between them, and James stumbled back. More voices rose from the crowd. Other servants, tradespeople who'd noticed things, citizens who'd stayed quiet out of fear or uncertainty. The tide had turned, and James saw it. In desperation, he pulled a derringer from his coat. You've all been fooled! She's... The gun in Elias's hand seemed to appear from nowhere, trained steady on James. Drop it! For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then James's nerve broke. The derringer clattered to the floor, and he fell to his knees, suddenly looking like the pathetic creature he'd always been beneath the respectability. Sheriff Watson stepped forward, motioning to his deputies. James Whitmore, you're under arrest for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. He looked at Clara. I apologize. Ma'am, justice was slow in coming. As James was led away, still protesting his innocence, the crowd began to disperse. Some came forward to apologize to Clara. Others slunk away in shame. Rebecca hugged her tight. tears streaming down both their faces, later standing outside the town hall under a canopy of stars. Clara breathed deep of the night air. "It's over," she said, wonder in her voice. "This part is," Elias agreed. He took her hand, threaded their fingers together. "Question is, what comes next?" Clara looked at him, this man who'd opened his coat to her on the worst night of her life, who'd stood beside her against all comers, who'd given her strength to reclaim herself. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But whatever it is, I want to face it with you. The cabin's still there," he offered. "If you want." "Yes," she said immediately, then laughed at her own eagerness. "Though perhaps we could expand it a bit. I was thinking a proper kitchen, maybe a second room." Already making plans. But he was smiling, that rare, transformative expression that made him look years younger. "Always," Clara said, pulling him down for a kiss. "I'm done running, done hiding. It's time to start building." Around them, Cedar Falls settled into sleep, but Clara was wide awake with possibility. She'd come here expecting judgment, possibly death. Instead, she'd found justice and the promise of a future she could shape with her own hands. Tomorrow, they would return to the mountains, to the cabin that had been her salvation. But it wouldn't be a retreat this time. It would be a beginning, the first chapter of a life chosen rather than imposed, defended rather than endured. And she would face it all with the man who'd seen her at her lowest and helped her find her strength, who'd offered her shelter and given her so much more. Together, they would build something worth defending in the wild heart of Montana, where the mountains stood eternal and love could grow as fierce and free as the wind itself. 6 months had passed since the confrontation in Cedar Falls. The cabin had transformed, just as Clara had envisioned. A proper kitchen extended from one side, a second room added for winter supplies and the goods from her new enterprise. The way station she'd dreamed of was becoming reality, one board and nail at a time. Clara stood in the doorway of their expanded home, watching the first travelers of the day approach. Word had spread along the mountain trails. There was a place now where honest folk could find hot food, basic supplies, and clean beds if needed. The woman who ran it had medicines too, and her man could fix most anything that broke on the trail. "Morning, Mrs. Boone," called out Tom Garrett, a regular trader who passed through monthly. "Got any of that cornbread today?" "Fresh from the oven," Clara replied, smiling at the name. She and Elias hadn't formally married. Neither felt the need for papers after everything they'd been through, but folks had taken to calling her Mrs. Boone anyway. And she didn't correct them. Elias emerged from the small forge they'd built, wiping sweat from his brow. The bullet wound from Cedar Falls had left him unable to ride hard for long distances. But he'd adapted, as he always did. His repair work was becoming known throughout the territory. Honest craft for honest pay. "Garrett." He nodded to the trader. "That axle still holding up?" "Good as new," Tom confirmed. "Better. Actually, you've got the touch." As Clara served cornbread and coffee, she caught Elias watching her with that quiet satisfaction she'd come to treasure. They'd built this together, created something from nothing but determination and trust. The money from the Whitmore estate, rightfully returned to her after James's conviction, had helped with supplies. But the real foundation was their partnership. "Heard James Whitmore died in prison," Tom mentioned casually. "Fever took him last month." Clara felt nothing. The man who'd tried to destroy her was gone, and she found she had no emotion left to spend on him. "May God have mercy on his soul," she said simply, and meant it. She'd left her anger in Cedar Falls along with her fear. After Tom departed, continuing his route with a full belly and repaired gear, Clara found herself alone with Elias in the quiet of mid-morning. He pulled her close, hands rough from work but gentle on her waist. "No regrets?" he asked, as he did sometimes when the past cast shadows. "None," she assured him, as she always did. "How could I regret the path that brought me to you?" A rider appeared on the trail, moving fast. They separated, instantly alert. Old habits died hard. But as the rider drew closer, Clara gasped in recognition. "Rebecca!" Her friend dismounted in a flurry of skirts, laughing as they embraced. "I had to see it for myself," Rebecca said, looking around in wonder. "Your letter made it sound like paradise." "Hardly paradise." Clara laughed. "But it's ours." They spent the day catching up. Rebecca had news from Cedar Falls. The town had prospered since James's corruption was exposed. His ill-gotten gains distributed among those he'd wronged. She'd brought letters too, from others who wanted to apologize, to reconnect. "You could come back," Rebecca said carefully. "Your name is clear now. You could reclaim your place in society." Clara looked around the cabin, at the herbs drying from the rafters, the weapons and tools sharing wall space, the bed where she and Elias had loved through mountain storms and summer heat. She looked at Elias himself, quietly mending harness while the women talked, present without intruding. "This is my place," she said with quiet certainty. "I'm not the woman who left Cedar Falls. Rebecca, I don't want to be her again." Rebecca smiled, understanding in her eyes. "No, you're not. You're stronger, happier." She lowered her voice. "And that man of yours looks at you like you hung the moon." That night, they convinced Rebecca to stay, making her a comfortable pallet in the main room. As the fire burned low and Rebecca's gentle snores filled the cabin, Clara and Elias stepped outside into the cool mountain air. The stars blazed overhead, unmarred by any city light. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled, no longer a sound of fear, but simply part of the wild symphony they'd chosen to join. "First snow will come soon," Elias observed, arm around her shoulders. "I'm ready for it," Clara said, and she was. Ready for winter storms and spring floods, for travelers good and bad, for whatever challenges this life might bring. She'd been tested by fire and ice, by violence and betrayal, and she'd emerged not just intact, but transformed. "Remember that first night?" Elias asked quietly. "You at my door, too proud to ask for shelter? And you opened your coat and said, 'Then just stay inside me.'" Clara smiled at the memory. "I thought you were mad. Maybe I was. Mad enough to recognize what everyone else missed, that you weren't broken, just bent, that all you needed was space to straighten back up and show your true strength." Clara turned in his arms, studying his face in the starlight. The scars from the mountain lion were silver now, badges of honor from a battle fought together. "We saved each other," she said. "That we did." A gust of wind swept down from the peaks, carrying the scent of pine and the promise of changing seasons. Clara shivered, and Elias immediately opened his coat, enveloping her in shared warmth. She laughed, the sound bright in the darkness. "Still taking shelter? I see," he murmured against her hair. "No," she corrected, pressing closer. "Just choosing where I want to be." They stood together in the vast Montana night, two souls who'd found each other at the edge of civilization and chosen to build something beautiful from the ashes of their pasts. Tomorrow would bring new travelers, new challenges, new opportunities to extend the hospitality that had once saved her life. But tonight, wrapped in Elias's coat and his love, Clara was simply grateful. Grateful for the storm that had driven her to his door. Grateful for the pride that had kept her from running further. Grateful for the man who'd seen her not as someone to save or possess, but as someone to stand beside. "I love you," she whispered into the wind. "And I love you," he replied, the words still rare enough to be precious. "Always." The wolf howled again, closer now, and Clara felt no fear. She was home, not just in this place, but in this life she'd claimed with blood and determination. In this love she'd found when she'd thought herself beyond redemption. The woman who'd been too proud to ask for shelter had discovered something better than refuge. She'd discovered that sometimes the strongest shelter isn't a place at all, but a person who opens their arms and says, "Stay." And sometimes the greatest courage isn't in standing alone, but in choosing to stand together against whatever storms may come. As they went back inside, leaving the vast darkness to the creatures who owned it, Clara knew that winter would come, and spring after that, and countless seasons beyond. But whatever they brought, she would meet them without fear. She She had her home, her purpose, her partner. She had everything. Thank you so much for listening to this story from the Wild West. Where are you listening from today? I'd love to hear in the comments below and connect with fellow Western tale enthusiasts. If you enjoyed Clara and Elias's journey, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of love, survival, and redemption in the American frontier. Share your thoughts about their story. Which moment touched your heart the most? Your engagement keeps these campfire tales burning bright.